Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. We have a guest today who we have been trying for a while now to get her on because we are very excited to hear what she has to say. Suzanne Young, who is the Governor's Secretary of Administration. Suzanne, welcome. And this is Ben Kinsley.
Thanks so much for being
who
here.
Ben is the Executive Director for Campaign for Vermont, and we co-host. So we always ask, so welcome. I'm glad we finally got you here.
Well,
This
thank
is
you,
good.
Pat.
So could you tell us a little bit about your background? We ask all our guests to do that.
Oh, okay. I am proud to be a native Vermonter. I grew up 10 miles down the road in Northfield, graduate of UVM and Vermont Law School. After law school, well, during law school, actually, I started working in the Attorney General's office when Jerome Diamond was the Attorney General as his law clerk, and ended up spending a good portion of my career as an Assistant Attorney General until I met Jim Douglas, and he was looking for a deputy treasurer at the time. And I took the leap, and I took a turn in my career and became deputy treasurer for then Treasurer Jim Douglas, and did that for 3 years. And then he invited me to be his legal counsel when he was elected governor, and I served as his legal counsel for 8 years.
That's great.
I then went back to the Attorney General's office and was Deputy Attorney General for a few years, and
until
Governor Scott invited me to join his team
That's
as
great.
Secretary of Administration.
I was very excited to hear that he wanted you to come over. That was great. With that background, you're a perfect fit for over there.
Well, thank
Really
you.
is. And we've known each other since your treasurer days, I think.
I remember you from my Attorney General
Oh,
days.
really?
I
Oh,
think
don't
you were
let's not-
Commissioner of Motor Vehicle.
Oh, then we must have met, yes. I dealt a lot with those people over there.
The Attorney General's office?
Yes, exactly. Somebody was always suing about something.
Yes.
Oh, no.
You know, so anyway, so we're talking, and I don't know how many people know what that means, Secretary of Administration, so I know you're busy all day.
I am busy all day. The Secretary of Administration is one of the cabinet level positions appointed by the governor. And the secretary is basically, I guess to simply put, is sort of the chief operations officer for the state of Vermont. Within the secretary's direct line of responsibility are departments that support the rest of state government primarily. So that includes the Department of Human Resources, the Department of Buildings and General Services, the Department of Taxes, the Department of Libraries, and the used to include the Department of Information and Innovation, which was our computer technology support, but no longer. And I know I'm missing. Oh, Department of Finance and Management,
Yes,
of course.
the Treasurer's Office. Yes. Oh, no, in the
no,
fifth floor,
the Commissioner of Finance, who has the
Right.
budget team that actually works on the budget that you want to talk about a little
Yes, I
later.
do.
And also, because this position supports the rest of state government, it's defined in statute as the principal assistant to the governor because it requires, sort of having that overview of state government and meeting the needs of every other agency.
So you're
That's
basically the point person for many of the departments and agencies to get to the administration or get to the governor if there's a problem and whatnot. So you're kind of that conduit in a lot of ways.
Yes, yes, I am primarily operationally. If someone needs personnel or someone needs.
Does buildings report into you?
Yes.
We said buildings.
Yeah,
Okay,
buildings and general services.
Right.
So that also includes procurement, contracting, and all of those things that come with.
And DII is now where? Where is
DII was subsumed into an agency that was created by executive order by Governor Scott early in this session. And what he did is he created an agency of digital services. So what that does is it brings all of the IT offices within state government, which have heretofore operated rather independently, under one umbrella. So what we hope to achieve there is some continuity in our IT projects, some efficiencies by blending the talent and the projects that we have in one agency. And I think it's already
Do you know when
very
I
successful.
first took my first job, which was, it was motor vehicles, and Pat Garahan was over at 333 where you were at the treasurer's.
Oh, yes.
I couldn't communicate to him. our computers didn't match.
Yeah.
Didn't
Uh-oh.
communicate, because when they started this whole thing, they were just doing it in this agency did their own thing, and nobody thought to bring them all together so we could talk. I just thought that was
Absolutely.
very
That's problematic.
strange. Yeah, exactly.
Come a long way.
They've come a long way. Although
Somehow Pat
from
managed
what
to
I
find
hear, DMV and the Secretary of State are still having a difficult time getting their systems to talk to each other.
Oh, that's interesting.
They're getting there, from my understanding, but they're
Yeah.
not quite there yet.
Well, the state
Is that on the voting? Or
Yeah,
on
for
the
voter
licensing?
registration purposes. Yeah,
right.
to make sure that the records are matching
Right.
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a great idea. So anyway, so the reason we did invite you here, and you mentioned it, is about the budget. And we've talked on this show with representatives from the legislature about the 26 million and about the teachers' health care plan. And I thought, we have all heard this, and it was a great idea, and it worked out fine at the end. But I thought people listening would like to hear all the other great things that are in the
Okay.
budget, because we haven't talked about any of those things. And I was telling Suzanne, Jill Krowinski mentioned a lot of their priorities in the Democratic Party were in the budget, and we haven't heard much about the budget. And I thought if we could take it through from when Governor Scott gave his inaugural address, he started getting hints about what
Right.
his focus was, and then it continued into the budget address, and then clearly in the budget. So I thought we could just take people through that there's a
Okay.
continuity of thought, and there's some great things in the budget, and sadly that they didn't get communicated as well, because we all got tied up in the
end game.
in the 26 million with the teachers. So in his inaugural address, which was January 5th, he had 3 areas, and I just thought you could comment on them. He wanted to focus on Vermont being the best education system, economic growth, which seems to be an overriding theme, and then creating opportunities. And maybe you could explain that overall message and what he
Okay.
was hoping to achieve.
So the governor's overall message at the inauguration, setting the stage for the budget a few weeks later, was to set his 3 strategic goals. His 3 priorities are growing Vermont's economy, making Vermont more affordable, and protecting the most vulnerable. So those items that you just mentioned, some of them are subsets of those 3 broader
Right.
goals. And so in his inaugural, he talked about the challenges that Vermont is facing in its economy and its demographics, and made the case for staying focused on those 3 goals. And the day he gave his inaugural address, he actually issued an executive order, Executive Order 1, which laid out and directed his cabinet and all the agencies and departments from that point forward to make all of their strategic and operational decisions around those 3 goals. Does it help make Vermont more affordable? Does it grow our economy? And does it protect the most vulnerable? So that is the theme that he set in the inaugural
And I've heard
address.
he's actually carried it. It's carried out. He's really serious about it and pushes back on the department heads.
He does.
Yeah,
He
that's what I
does.
heard.
And the department in his cabinet meets every week with him, and those goals are reinforced,
Well,
and
good
we
for
talk
him.
about how we can keep working to achieve
for
them.
him.
One thing that Vermonters have also probably heard is this 631. And 631 is derived from the challenges that his goals are, that his strategic priorities are designed to address, that we lose 6 workers in our workforce on average every day. We lose 3 children in our public school system, 3 fewer students in our
Right.
school system on average every day, and almost 1 baby born to opiate addiction every day. And so when you look at it that way, those are the curves we're trying to bend.
Right.
Right.
And we're
Right.
trying to grow workers
Yep.
and grow our student base, and provide treatment to the most vulnerable,
Great.
and
Great.
keep them in the workforce as well.
In a number of ways, it's kind of unusual for a governor, especially a first-term governor, to set such specific priorities. Normally, a governor comes in and has all these things that they want to accomplish, but Governor Scott's agenda has been pretty narrowly focused on these 3 areas. Not that these 3 areas can't be broken down into smaller
Right.
subsets, but do you feel like that makes the administration more effective because you're so focused on those three areas for evaluating your progress as a state government?
Absolutely, and I've experienced it myself one morning, this morning actually, talking to someone about, what in the scheme of things was probably a pretty minor, $7,000 issue, and I said, well, let's step back. The decision on this. Well, let's see. Is this going to make Vermont more affordable for somebody?
Great
Is this
for
going to grow the economy? And does this affect the most vulnerable? And when you start making decisions, with that in the back of your mind, the whole, day to day, it does help you become more effective in achieving those goals. And I've heard it from some of the department heads that I work with that, boy, this just makes it so much easier to kind of
it
get
gives
in.
them a framework.
Yes.
Because before, I think it was so open that they were just looking at the cost of it rather than the end result and what it accomplished.
Right.
That's
and,
great.
And it helps you prioritize.
Yeah. So, and then we had the governor's budget address, which was January 24th, and he laid out just what you're saying, all the benchmarks, and I think he just reiterated those three areas again. Was there anything else in that budget address that we should focus on?
I think what was most important about the budget address and the budget goal was no new taxes, no new fees, and level property taxes and a level funded budget, and that was all designed to help us achieve the goals about keeping Vermont more affordable, keep the property taxes down. Let's not raise fees. Let's not add fees. Let's live within our means. It was really, I think the term was used a few times. Let's just put a pause on growing the budget. Let's look at what we've got. Let's look where we can improve, and let's look at what we need to do to achieve, the three goals, the three priorities the governor set.
So I want to explore one thing you said a little bit more. So keeping property taxes level in Vermont is something that the legislature has struggled with for years, and it's mostly because the state doesn't have a whole lot of control over property taxes, at least in the post-Act 60 and 68 world, because those really are driven by local trends, your student count at the local level, what your budgets are at the local level. Governor Scott's initial budget proposal included a piece that would allow the state to reach back and actually force school districts to level fund their budgets. That got quite a bit of pushback from the legislature. Ultimately, it didn't move forward. But I think it did set the stage for this showdown at the end of the legislative session over teachers' healthcare contracts, which was a piece of that initial proposal. That was the other funding mechanism to try to level fund education. Do you think there's another way to go about finding property tax savings, in the future to help continue to address that cost driver to Vermonters?
Well, I think there have been ongoing efforts through Act 46, through consolidation. I don't think there's much disagreement that with our declining pupil population, we've got to address it with the education, fund, which continues to grow despite the dwindling student population. And so the governor's, as you mentioned, his first proposal in his budget was to put a pause and let's level fund all of our school district budgets, just as I'm doing with the state budget, and take a look at how we can budget in a way that achieves level funding there and addresses our demographics. That required a proposal that the town meetings or the school budget meetings be put off until May, and that didn't meet with much support. Fast forward to the topic you don't want to talk about, which is the I understand it did take the air out of the room, but then through the session we started learning about the new health benefit plans that were being proposed for teachers, and every teacher's contract was opening up this year because of the Affordable
Right.
Care Act.
Right.
And the entity that provides the insurance plans to the education system had told us that these plans were going to be as rich, but we're going to save substantial money. And school districts, the theory behind the governor's last proposal with these plans was, if we can achieve the maximum savings in these plans, school districts can right-size their health benefit line item in their budgets, and they can reboot their budgets with that much less that they have to raise and spend for health care. So that is one example of how we need to take a hard look at our budgets and where can we achieve savings. And this was a pot of savings that the governor just felt he could not walk away from and leave on the table.
Right.
I don't understand why there was such a pushback about that, because I've been in human resources a few years, and when you have a larger group to bargain with, you get a better deal.
Mm-hmm.
So if you bring all of the teachers together, and in one group, they've got to have power to make a good deal for themselves, which has got to be better than individual schools. I don't quite understand that.
Well, I believe that the fundamental disagreement or line in the sand for those who didn't want to do it this year was the fact that there was ongoing bargaining, and they did not want to interfere in any bargaining that had already started, any contracts that had closed. I think the Senate was very open to the idea of a statewide health benefit contract, not a teacher's contract, but just for the health care benefit. And they were very instrumental in helping us at the end, supporting a commission that would take a hard look at that this year and make a report. And all the contracts now are going to close in mid-2019. So we've recreated on one level the opportunity to achieve the goal again.
Right.
What we may have lost are the savings that could have been achievable this year.
Is the 80-20 out there where the split, because there are some schools that are getting subsidized 100%, right?
Yes, and there are.
They're not happy.
So there are many different permutations of 4 basic plans that are being offered that the school districts are now negotiating. What the final budget did was put into the budget, into the statute or session law, that you can maximize your savings by picking this particular plan that has these parameters: an 80-20 split, a certain amount of out-of-pocket, and an HRA or an HSA up to a certain amount. And so basically what it does is sets in the session law guidance for the school districts, which basically says, if you can negotiate to this plan or get as close to this plan as possible, you will achieve savings. And so this is sort of the bogey in the session law. It didn't mandate it, but it did provide school districts some guidance.
The budget does reopen all the contracts in 2019. So in 2 years, we're going to have this conversation again about whether or not to move to a statewide teacher healthcare contract. And there's some, it's interesting because I've heard a couple different angles on this, but there's some logic to having it negotiated at the statewide level, since technically all the education dollars are collected at the statewide level. So therefore, if those dollars are all flowing through the state, are teachers then actually employees of the state because those dollars are coming from the state? So it's kind of an interesting question when you start getting into the weeds about who the employer actually is, because the state is the one that has set up this collection system and is then giving the dollars back to the local school district to fund their budgets. So it gets murky.
I've never heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it gets a little murky.
Yeah.
Well, we have a statewide education fund. Basically, when you put the budget together, you have 3 big chunks and almost equal chunks of a $5.8 billion budget, and there's the 2+ in the education fund, the 2+ in the human services fund, and whatever is left for the general fund. And the general fund is what supports the ongoing operations of state government, and is really the pot that you go to create jobs, to achieve the economic development goals and the affordability goals. And So you do need to, pay attention, I think, to the education fund, and there's an awful lot of general fund that goes into the education fund to support it that I don't think a lot of folks understand as well. So we have an interest in keeping it.
Is AHS or education the biggest chunk of the
I think
pie?
they're pretty even.
Are they?
Yeah.
Education's a tad bigger,
Is
just
it?
a little, just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to one thing. Going back to, does this improve the quality of life for Vermonters? Does this make Vermont more affordable? So we're in the middle of Act 46. We're a little over, actually, almost a year over, halfway through the Act 46 process. We had this teachers' health care contract debate this year, $26 million, which is a little over 2% of education spending in Vermont. Act 46, it's pretty much a mixed bag. Some districts are saving money, some districts are losing money. At the end of the day, it's pretty much a wash. The State Board of Education has even said it's not saving any dollars at the statewide level. In terms of real dollars in Vermonters' pockets, are there any strategies that we can use on the property tax end of it, or on the on even the general revenue side of it, to actually reduce the tax burden on Vermonters, make Vermont a more affordable place to live? Is there anything that the administration's working on that kind of pushes that forward?
Well, we're going to be taking a look at that as we develop the budget for 2019 and look at it holistically again, as Governor Scott did in his 2018 budget proposal. I'm not going to get out in front of that process, but I mean, I think finding the savings and finding the efficiencies in other areas of the budgets, have got to be continue to be the focus for school districts, and getting that per pupil cost down somehow, some way is really got to be achievable, because
And you'll
it's
have a
unsustainable.
year under your belt, because
That's
when
right.
after the election, you don't have much time.
That's
It's
the toughest
November,
budget.
December,
Right.
January, it's due.
Yes,
And that's a very
yes.
short time. If of course, Governor Scott's been in the legislature for a long, long time, so he understands the budget, but that's still a lot of work to do in 2 months.
And state law actually does provide for a governor-elect to start preparing a budget a little bit early, like the day after election,
Right.
and provides a small budget for the governor-elect to start getting to work. And so Governor-elect Scott had a budget team that was helping him craft a budget through November, December, and then his permanent team comes in as appointees and putting the finishing touches
Still a
on
lot
it.
of work.
And
It's a lot of work in a very short time
It is a lot in a
frame.
very short time. So I this year we have the luxury, I guess, so to speak, of having a little more time to craft the
Right.
budget, and that typically starts in August.
That's right. Well, because you have new appointees, they don't know, like Al Gobey, Human Services, how do you grab hold of that in a month or two? So he'll have it under his belt next year.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I have to ask you, because I was so impressed. I don't ever remember where a budget gets passed in the House with, nonpartisan, bipartisan, whatever, with only one negative vote.
Right.
And you made investments, and there's a whole list of things here: economic development, education, training, housing, funding the opiate addiction, and the cleanup of impaired waterways. Yet, you didn't use one-time funds, you didn't increase. How did you get them to do that? So I'm really serious, because these are things that they're passionate about, and all of the legislators, Democrats, Republicans, progressive. But to say no to increases, and yet you've accomplished a great deal. And because they're always looking at one-time funds to cover lots of stuff, and there was no one-time fund use in this either. So were you guys living up there, or?
Well, as you know, Pat, from your days working for former governors, the governor has a ceremonial office in the legislature,
Yes, he does,
and
provides coffee for those of you who want to
and
go
has
out.
an open door, so any Vermonter who wants to come in and have coffee with him during the session on a particular day of the week is welcome. But yes, you do spend a lot of time, if not all of your time, at the legislature as Secretary of Administration and Budget, the Budget Commissioner, and the Governor spends a substantial amount of time there as well. But there was, I think, a lot of hard work, a lot of compromise and cooperation. And coupled with what we didn't expect was the uncertainty that was developing in Washington, D.C. surrounding federal funding and what was the future of our federal funds going to be. And then the governor's message, I think, did resonate. That we have.
You must admit it's unusual that that gets passed by an overwhelming majority. I mean, I think the one representative who voted no was not that he didn't object to anything. He just wanted more money spent on what you'd already funded. So I don't think it was I don't like this.
No,
so.
I think it was a very unique, as you mentioned, cooperative effort because you can't deny the numbers, the demographics, and the challenges that we were facing, coupled with the uncertainty. And
so I think we found it interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but every one of the legislators that we talked to, first in the beginning of the year and during the budget, we asked them, "What did you hear from Vermonters?" And they all said the same thing. Yeah. It was very clear: lower property taxes. I mean, it just went on and on. They all heard the same thing. Right. So it's pretty clear from Vermonters what they were expecting.
Exactly. And I think to the Governor Scott's credit, he articulated it well. He reminded them whenever possible.
Didn't you get that sense from them that they were all?
Yeah.
They were all hearing the same thing.
I think everyone we talked to in the legislature was like, "This is what we're hearing. Property taxes are still out of control. Act 46 is causing a lot of confusion at the local level, and not a whole lot of savings in many cases. And there are really big issues we have to deal with. The economy being one of them. But even I think there's a sense of unease, particularly among older working class people, because we have this huge challenge, this demographic issue, not just in our schools but also in our workforce.
Right, exactly.
And we know the numbers, we know what they are, but there's anecdotally people are seeing their kids leaving the state, they're seeing young people leaving the state, they're seeing older people retiring and no one's taking their jobs. Right. And that's concerning to a lot of people. A lot of people I talk to are really concerned about that type of stuff, and that kind of transcends things like property taxes and state government and things, and it's an issue that we know is coming that we have to deal with.
So the governor's budget, to your point about more of the detail, many of the things, the good stuff you see in here is an outgrowth of trying to bend the curve on the 631. The 6 is the losing an average six workers from our workforce every day. How do we develop our workforce? And well, we attract businesses, and we try to get businesses to do business and come to Vermont. But we also need to attract a workforce, and we need to make Vermont affordable for that workforce. And part of that is the affordable housing that you will see in the budget, and that was a huge. That's a huge success, and is going to be a huge help in achieving that goal. There's some money in the budget to help with childcare. If you have a young working family you want to attract to Vermont, you've got to provide them with some affordable, quality childcare so that they can go to the workforce. So throughout these items in the budget, the demographics of the 631 really drove a lot of the budget decisions.
Yes, it was a lot of, because the governor went to UVM and studied technical education. I think he was looking to be a tech ed instructor. So he's put money into training, and not just higher ed, which he did, which was great. Because I think we fund higher ed in such a minuscule amount, it's pretty embarrassing, I think. So I was glad to see that went up. But he also supports tech ed, which most of the businesses, that's what they need, is people that know what equipment is and how to deal with the stuff they're dealing with on a regular basis.
Yeah, people have basic training on certain machines, and there's some businesses that are starting to partner with technical education centers. For example, IBM is working with the Essex Tech Center to train people to work on their product lines, right? And I think that's where a lot of that future is going to come from, is businesses who are partnering with tech centers and
Right.
colleges and universities to actually get the skill sets that they're looking for in a production floor or in their company.
So the governor's original budget moved all of our education spending into the education fund as the proposal.
Right.
It was dubbed the Cradle to Career
Right,
Education
right.
Fund, and it moved some of the higher ed spending, the VSAC, the early ed expenditures,
Yep.
and tried to create an education budget that really reflected
Right.
what we need to do to transform into the best
Right.
education system. And it starts with the young
Right.
children, preschool up through the higher ed and the tech programs that you've mentioned and the state
When I was
colleges.
in the Department of Labor, one of the big issues was if IBM brought somebody in from New York, and one of the other issues is if the wife's working, the wife can't find a job either. So if you want to bring people in from the outside, you sometimes have to look at two jobs for the wife or the husband or whoever's being moved by their company. The other spouse wants to work too, and that some people have actually turned down relocation jobs because they know they can't find jobs for their spouse.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. My personal experience with that was my daughter, who was graduating and married at the time
Yeah.
from grad school, and she was looking to work in a hospital in rural Maine back in 2008,
Wow.
where jobs were not
Oh,
easy
yeah.
to
Yeah,
find.
right.
Not
That's
easy.
tough
And her
for-
husband had the same degree, and she brought him to the job interview and said, I can't come if I can't,
Right,
he can't find a
exactly.
job. And so this small hospital hired them both.
Wow.
And
Lucky. That's
they
great.
relocated, they're still working at the
That's
hospital, and it's sort of,
Yeah,
the
but I
kind
don't
of
think
innovative
people don't think
thinking.
about that.
Yeah.
You
it's-
bring in one person, one
Right.
spouse, the other one wants to work too. These days, everybody's working, so.
And the hospital's reasoning for that was
Yeah.
because we keep losing people because their spouses can't find a
Exactly.
job in rural Maine.
Yep.
So there are ways, I think, that
that's
industries and
good.
businesses can
That's good. Anyway,
work with that.
so can I just ask you about two things?
Sure.
That opiate addiction, what's happening? Because I know the governor has appointed somebody to.
Right.
Maybe you could expand on that a little
Well,
bit, because
Again,
this discussion just scares me,
yeah.
just does.
Again, on Inauguration Day, the governor issued an executive order creating the Opioid Council.
Mhm.
And Jolinda LeClaire, who you may
Oh.
know, was appointed as the opiate, don't overuse the term czar, but
Yep,
she's
right. We
she's
have Jolinda on
responsible
the
for
show.
pulling, for identifying, all the services, all the programs, all of the resources, not just from the state, but from
Right.
around private businesses and other social programs together, and try to come up with a really good, response to the opiate crisis. Clearly, we need, more treatment. In the governor's budget, he put some money towards treatment. He actually, the designated agencies needed more resources to retain substance abuse counselors and other treatment providers. So
Yeah, they've had a really difficult time holding on to their
Right.
counselors and their staffers. I think we talked to Washington County Mental Health
Oh, right.
a couple months ago,
Yeah.
and they were like almost 75% of their staffers or their positions were filled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they had 25% of their positions
Not filled.
that were
Yeah.
not filled at all, and they
Right.
couldn't find people for them who could work at that pay level.
Right.
Hospital was hiring them
Right.
off or whatever, and they're kind of put in this box because of the parameters set by the state, and
Right.
so it's difficult.
Right.
And I know the ones in southern Vermont, some of them are even worse shaped than Washington County is. So it's definitely an issue, and trying to provide those services to people.
And we need to provide those services to people, because we're losing people every day from our the workforce we're trying to develop.
Right,
We need to help get them into treatment,
Well,
into
this opiate
recovery.
thing, I'm very involved with Prevent Child Abuse Vermont with Linda Johnson.
Right.
And the numbers of child abuse was really going down the last few years. And now, because of the opiate issue, it's rising again, and these kids
Yeah.
are putting up with just horrible
Yeah,
things
no,
at home. It's just terrible.
2 years ago, when I was still in the Attorney General's office, the AG's office has got a very large division at the Department of Children and Families that handles a lot of the
Yeah,
parental rights
right,
cases, and the boom in those cases
Yeah.
and the growth in those cases
Yeah.
was again, to
Where
your
they've got
point,
the
rather
Guardian ad
just-
litem program, which is just blown up because
right,
there's so
and-
many of these kids in the system now are needing help.
And I sat on a group that was put together by the legislature to take a look, holistically. It included a guardian ad litem, a prosecutor, a
Right.
judge, and the AG's office, and looking at the needs of the system and how can we get these cases through and find these children's permanency,
Right.
find these children
Right.
permanency if that's the right result. And what was lacking was the guardian ad litem
Yeah, right.
program was really lacking in resources and volunteers to help
Well,
out
they've
with these
contracted
cases.
with Prevent Child Abuse Vermont to go
Right.
up to Franklin
So-
County, and that apparently is working really well because
Yeah.
a lot of states do contract it out.
Yeah.
But they're doing a lot of work trying to get people to volunteer.
And again, that's reflected
Yeah.
in the governor's
Right,
budget. That
exactly.
was
There
one
was a
of
lot
his
of funding.
one of his
Yeah.
proposals to
Right.
help address,
Yeah.
the collateral damage on the
Yeah.
children and getting the
Yeah.
courts, the resources
Yeah, we
they
like
need
that.
to deal with that. Well,
was
it's
good.
very sad but true, and
Yeah.
and so that's
Is
very
there a
significant.
source issue here? I mean, I'm probably asking something I shouldn't even, I mean, this comes from somewhere. Who's working on the stop it coming in?
Well,
Right,
that
is
clearly
that-
it would be law enforcement,
Yeah,
and
right.
it's probably a good topic for you to invite Commissioner Anderson in on.
Yes, we should do that because
Yeah.
if you don't
He's-
have it coming in, you won't have the
Right.
problem.
Yep, and so they're the first line of interdiction
Yeah.
and, stopping the flow
Right.
in, but, so I think
Because it just keeps coming, keeps coming. So
It's a
anyway,
difficult
go ahead.
issue.
Yeah,
It really.
it
I mean,
is.
it's so entrenched now too that it's become generational, right? So parents are using, and then the kids get into the habit, and it's kind
They're
of
born addicted.
or they're born addicted,
well,
right?
that's the one,
And that's the one,
631.
right?
Right?
And-
Oh, God.
Yeah.
This is so bad.
But
yeah.
it gives you something, simplifying it down to that
Right.
really illustrates why the governor has chosen the
Yeah.
goals he chose.
Well, and
Um,
I think he has truly
the-
chosen the right ones.
And that again informs
Right.
everybody's decision making on a daily basis, and that is I've been around state government a long time, as you know, Pat, and it really is the first time I feel like I've got to focus, and I
Right.
have a job where having that focus makes
Yeah.
makes
Well,
decision
I would
making
think the
easier.
commissioners and secretaries feel the same way
Absolutely.
because sometimes you're over in those offices and you have really much no
Mm-hmm.
clue not what you're supposed to be doing, but what's the end result. And so
Yeah.
he's really laid that out. Which
And I
is-
think it comes with constant
Yeah.
communication and reinforcement. And as I said, we
Yep.
have weekly cabinet level
That's great.
meetings with the governor. And I think that's probably the first in a long time.
Yep, I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say so.
So I think I was just reading over the list here of different initiatives that Governor Scott had proposed in his budget address, and I think we've actually covered quite a few of them. We talked about STEM grants. We talked about Vermont State Colleges and giving them more funding, which finally, after I think 8 years, we did that. A couple of them that are interesting here that he had noted for more investment was Human Services, Vermont Health Connect, Medicaid, and we were just talking about this, the Guardian Ad Litem program. What are those? What types of investments are those, and how are those investments going to be leveraged to benefit Vermonters?
So I think those are probably less investments. The Vermont Health Connect, of course,
Right. Who knows?
maybe not less investment, but not as budget driven this year,
Right.
but more operationalized.
Yep.
And I taking a look at Health Connect, the technology was high on the list for Secretary Gobet, and to see if we could take the state out of being the middleman for those individuals who use Vermont Health Connect but are not subsidized and don't have to use the
Right.
state
So
as a middleman.
so the
that's-
off-board ramp. Yeah.
Yes, and so that's been a work in progress, and it's been interesting that some people, I mean, there's been a lot of outreach, and some small businesses and other individuals feel enough uncertainty in either their business or their personal lives that they don't really want to off-board if they may need the subsidy in the future. So
Right.
that's, I think, going to take some time to
And you
tweak.
don't know what's coming from Washington.
Exactly.
Right, that's the other thing that you
that
don't
has
know.
Elephant in the
definitely,
room.
and
Yeah.
definitely that has been a factor in
Yeah.
moving too aggressively forward
Right.
because
Because you don't want to do something and then have the whole world
Redo it.
change and
exactly.
you know.
But looking at the technology and making that technology better is still a
Right,
priority. You know, the program itself is working much more efficiently, but a lot of it is still manual.
Right.
And so unraveling some of that technology and
Yeah.
replacing the
The
manual.
system is basically in place at this point, correct? It's really at this point ongoing maintenance and operating the system is really where the costs are now.
I believe so, and that
Okay.
again would be a better question for Secretary Gobet. But I know that they still have some technology challenges that they're
Right.
so
That's a
we're
big
still doing a
system.
bit of
Is
a
it-
manual
yeah.
process. And then, of course, to your point, we don't want to change too much in
Yeah,
the
I just
program
don't-
itself until we know.
Well, it'd be
Exactly.
great to have a system that can accommodate whatever the feds do.
Right.
But,
Right.
I mean, there's the whole issue of how much money are they giving us? I mean,
Right.
we don't know anything.
Right.
Because it's mostly federal dollars at this
Yeah,
point. So
right.
it's yeah.
Right.
So
So a couple other things, that came out in the budget proposal. We already talked about the teachers' health care, so I'll skip that for the moment. But the Windsor, closing the Windsor prison was in there. Merger of Agency of Economic Development with the Department of Labor, and merging liquor control and lottery departments. Do you want to talk a little bit about those? And
I thought they
you know,
were great suggestions. I really did.
We did too.
I was going to write all kinds of letters
Yeah.
of support, especially liquor control and lottery.
Right.
And the Windsor, I mean, what a great piece of real estate to put back
it's
on the
gorgeous
market
if you've
for
never
people
been
down.
out there. It
No,
is
I've been down.
beautiful,
I've been down
yeah.
there. It's just amazing.
Well, liquor lottery, again, backing up to the executive orders, there were 3 orders that the governor signed early in his tenure. By law, they had to be executed, signed by him by January 15. And then they go over, if it's a reorganization of government order,
Right.
it does require some legislative buy-in. The first order that made it through was the merger or the creation of the Agency of Digital Services.
Right.
So that one, folks really supported. It made a lot of sense. The merger of labor and commerce made a lot of sense to the governor and to his team because it achieved putting the workers, in the same
I know.
agency as the programs that are trying to bring economic development into
Right.
the state
Right.
and sort of people who are trying to find jobs, paired with the folks who are trying to fill
them.
jobs. And there was some untangling of some federal money and some federal requirements, but at the end of the day, the legislature did not approve it. And we're going to continue to look at it.
Could you share with what the reason was? Because I thought that was interesting that they decided they didn't want employee and employer because they thought probably the employee would
Yeah.
lose.
Yeah.
And that's just so not true, the way that the
Yeah.
agencies work. It
Yeah.
makes so much sense. We combined labor and industry and employment and training, and the next logical move was the one the governor
Right.
proposed.
I think the most vocal reason not to do it was you didn't want to put the regulator,
Right.
the labor department, in the same agency as the regulated
It's all
community.
about leadership. If you have the right
So-
leadership, it'd work. Seriously,
Yeah.
it would work.
Yeah. So we'll see what the
Are you
next
gonna,
session brings.
Is that a issue on the shelf, or we can dust it
Well,
off?
we're
I hope
you know,
so.
setting our priorities for the next
there's
budget
money-
round.
Picking-
So
There's
picking your
money to be
battles.
saved,
Yeah,
and
I
the
mean-
Department of Labor has got the most amazing statistical information that's paid for by the feds, so there's a funding issue here. But I mean, they can put out all kinds of
Oh, yeah.
statistical data there.
Yeah.
It's amazing what that department's got.
It does.
They
It is.
they do have a lot of information.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And if you get the right person, we've had some wonderful people managing that. You ask them a question, 2 minutes later, they're back with the right answer on the
Right.
economy, on growth, on whatever you want. It's there.
Cool stuff.
And liquor lottery merger was not successful in the executive order realm, but what we did get out of it is, I think, a very serious study
Good.
of the merger and what it would look like and what that would entail. And so I'm hopeful that that
It's
commission
the same skills. It's communicating, it's selling something to
Right.
to the Vermonters.
Right,
It's,
and you're buying
yeah,
normally your liquor and your lottery ticket at the same
Exactly.
venue.
it's the
and
same
so,
skill.
So we'll see. That one just makes a lot of sense. And I think,
Yeah.
you know, as I go around Vermont and talk to my neighbors, they say, you know, that one seemed like a no-brainer
Exactly.
too. So
I'm
we'll see.
with you on that.
We'll see.
And the Windsor prison one, if you could.
Windsor.
I thought that was a great idea.
Well, Windsor Prison is a beautiful piece of realty. It employs quite a number of Vermonters in that
Right.
region. The governor's proposal was to close it, and I think it would save about $3.5 million on the bottom line there. I think there's a philosophical issue that some folks had with that, because in their minds that means we would be sending more people out of state, and some have the goal of bringing everybody back, and they saw that as perhaps counterproductive to that. And also there's legislators identified a need to have some sort of transitional facility and transitioning individuals out of prison into the communities. And so what has happened with Windsor is we're going to shut it down as a prison and then be looking at other uses for it. But there's also a broader directive in the Capitol bill to the Secretary of Human Services to step back and take a look at all of human services building needs.
Right.
From a psychiatric facility to correctional facilities to juvenile facilities, and step back and take a look at what you need and what's the best way to go about providing the building needs, and we'll see what comes of that as well. So that was all
That's great.
sort of pushed off,
Maybe it'll come
part of
out
the
okay.
study, and it's on the path to closure. Whether it will reopen as something else, time will tell.
Nice.
Well, and AHS has a pretty large footprint. They have buildings everywhere, all over the place.
They
So,
do.
you got to imagine at some point they'd be able to find some of it, and some of them are just up the road from each other. So you would have to imagine that at some point they'd be able to try to find some efficiencies in,
Exactly.
their footprint, their physical footprint.
Right. So that's a charge that the Secretary
That's great.
and VGS will be taking a look at.
So just so we had the budget, the governor presented the budget, it went to the House. The House unanimously made some changes, but it was pretty much still what the governor wanted, no increases, no one-time money. And then the governor sort of discussed vetoing that, and marijuana, and the Jill was calling it something else, but the fee bill, or whatever, the tax bill.
Right.
And then at the end of maybe you could take us through how that all worked at the end of the session, and that we came out okay.
Well, at the end of the session, the budget as passed did not take advantage of the savings that everybody, I think, at the end of the day agreed were available in moving to these new plans in the education system. And as I think I said earlier, the governor was not going to walk away from those savings, and wanted the legislature to take advantage of those and not lose that opportunity. And so he vetoed the budget and the tax bill, because they did not take advantage of those savings. And so what ensued was some compromise and some negotiation over, let's maximize the savings to the extent possible with the line, the philosophical line that was preventing us from getting there is that we don't want to interfere, from primarily the legislator's perspective, with the ongoing bargaining and collective bargaining that's going on now at the local level. So we achieved a compromise where I think I told you earlier, and we don't need to repeat it.
And there was a lot of work. People need to know there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work being done to get something everybody could agree on.
Yeah. So it wasn't, everything we wanted, but it was, again, as most sessions,
the
it's
marijuana
compromise.
bill is sort of on hold till next year.
The marijuana bill was vetoed, and now there is a commission that's basically studying that as well, and where should we go. The governor's got, public safety issues foremost in his mind, and child safety issues.
As well.
So
we won't discuss. It was supposed to be nonpartisan.
It's coming back. That will come back in January. Not. So now we have this veto session in June. We now have a budget in place, which is getting a little bit close because for viewers out there, June 30th is the end of the fiscal year.
Right.
So if there wasn't a budget in place by June 30th, essentially the state government would shut down. There really is no provision. There's no safety valve built into the Vermont Constitution to allow for ongoing expenditures. So it was cutting a little bit close, getting it there. I know the governor had put out there he wasn't going to let it shut down.
I think everybody felt that. All of the guests we had on said they're just not going to.
They're just not going to go there.
Yeah.
But regardless, they were a few days away from that happening. So we now have a budget in place. Basically, it's somewhat similar to what the governor had asked for starting out at the beginning of the session, even though it doesn't include all the savings for those teachers' health care plans. We just found out, I think last week, that we're now facing a revenue downgrade of almost $29 million.
Right.
So what's the process for that? We talked a little bit about before the show, but what's the process for fixing that revenue downgrade?
Right. It feels like the never-ending budget
I
cycle.
It does.
I don't
absolutely
understand
is.
how we can pass a budget and the next day we're like 57 million in the hole, or this one is only 28.
Well,
or 30.
it's the latest in a long string of budget downgrades. This one's not as bad as some of the previous ones.
To the state's credit, to Vermont's credit, we're very disciplined, both the legislature and the administration, in figuring out how much money we can expect in revenues and spending only what we can expect in revenues. And so there is this process called a consensus revenue forecast, and the state has an economist on contract, and the legislature has an economist, and every 6 months they get together and they do what economists do, and they look at all of the data and the revenues that are coming into the tax department and transportation, and they come in January and they say, gee, you're on track, the budget is good to go, and you don't need to make any adjustments in January. This year they made adjustments. It was a $14 million downgrade. And then in July they come in and say, gee, that budget you just signed into law 3 weeks ago, the revenues are not on target to support that level of expenditure, so the administration and the legislature have to work together to achieve more savings in the budget that just passed.
Right.
So there's a process called the Emergency Board, which is the governor and the 4 chairs of the money committees at the legislature who accept the economist consensus forecast and say, yes, in the general fund we need to downgrade our forecast by 28 million is what they did last Friday. On one hand, we're fortunate that 16 million plus of that is a downgrade because there are some extraordinary corporate tax refunds outstanding that did not get determined and paid in FY17, and will likely, if they're determined to be refundable, will be paid in 2018.
Great.
So the legislature did provide some one-time money in their process to balance that out. And we found some other one-time money and came to a consensus with the E-Board on Friday to use 16 million in one time, a little bit of surplus that we had and some other funds. So we were able to put that to bed. So right now what is going on in the world of finance and management is they are looking at $12 million, the difference.
So they basically cut it in half.
Yeah.
But
And
we've
so
got
now
that
we're trying to find
request-
savings.
We've got that request from Blue Cross Blue Shield, right? They've come back and
Yeah,
asked
and
for
that came out last
15
week.
million, is that? I think it's
I
15.
think that might be a little.
15.4 million is what my notes say. So.
Yeah, my memory is that might be the total over 3 years.
Yeah, that's over 3 years, yes,
right?
that's
And
over 3
so now
years.
they, as I understand it, there's a reconciliation process that has been ongoing
maybe a lot
between
less.
Medicaid and Blue Cross, and this will be the reconciliation for 2016. And they sent a letter in the midst of last week's, Joint Fiscal Committee and Emergency Board preparation that they think that the Medicaid program reconciliation is going to be $10 million to their favor.
Oh.
But that will be
Oh.
vetted and negotiated, and we'll see where that ends up. And it may be a pressure that we'll have to deal with in
Because
budget
I read
adjustment.
that, I went, gosh, with the federal.
Yeah, and
the
the
federal
good news there
dollars
is I've
and-
been told that this will probably be the last reconciliation
Oh,
year
good.
because Health Connect has gotten
Right,
better
right.
at
Yeah.
processing.
So it sounds like that maybe the feds are going to be on the hook for at least most of that reconciliation.
Yeah,
hopefully.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
through
the Medicaid budget
through
is
Medicaid.
Yeah.
it is in our state Medicaid budget, but it's federal funds. so,
Right. Yeah.
they'll-
So one other thing I want to quickly mention in 30 seconds
Yes,
that we
exactly.
have is the federal budget. Right, we're staring down this potential federal budget change. We don't know how it's going to affect Vermont. Is that something that the administration is really concerned about? Is it something that you're aware of but not that concerned about, or where are you guys? How are you guys feeling about that?
Well, we're all very concerned, and again, I think I said earlier, I think that's part of what drove a lot of the
Businesses,
consensus
right.
with the budget, with the legislature and the administration this year. What we did is we tried to find every dollar that we could and put them into reserves, and we found some money to put in what we call, our hedge against what might happen
right.
in federal funding. It's going to be nowhere near enough, but
we
we've
have
been
an
storing
unusually-
away and
We
hoping
have
we
an
don't have to
unusually
use
high
it.
Right.
percentage of federal dollars compared to other
We-
states, don't we?
we
We've
do.
always had that.
We do, and it's pretty.
I thought
It is going to
47%,
be.
is that accurate?
I think that's it.
Yeah,
Yep.
for some reason, that's the
Um,
number.
One of the. Well, we only have 30 seconds left,
Yeah.
but when you try to achieve savings in the general fund, you end up going to the same departments over and over again that do
Right.
not have the
That
federal
don't
money.
have federal funds.
And
Yeah.
there is.
So I'm getting the
very
signal
few.
that we have to.
Well, thank you.
Suzanne, I can't thank you enough for
All
coming
right,
on.
well,
This was very
thank you.
educational. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. We'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites. Thank you.
Great,
See you
thank
later.
you.